You're referring to the Paul and Elder model, which identifies 8 elements of reasoning, which, if I can remember them all, sometimes the words change a little bit, but basically purpose, information, assumptions, conclusions, implications. I'm missing one, but you get the point. And when you can use these elements until you develop the habits to internalize them, which you can refer to them if you have to analyze a problem. Okay, so the element of question is the one I forgot. But if you're trying to consider some problem, you need to frame the problem, and in that sense, you have to look at, all right, from what perspective am I looking at this problem? Perspective is one of the elements. Why? Why is this a problem? And that's related to the purpose of solving this problem is the why. So what are the questions related to solving this problem? What are the current consequences for the existence of this problem? And later, if I'm coming up with possible solutions, I have to evaluate any solution I might come up with as well. So I have to look at, what do I think the purpose of my solution is? What are any questions related to my solution? What are any conclusions I'm drawing about this solution? And so those 8 elements give us the vocabulary to discuss the topics. Now, other frameworks might use different words, but generally you can always come back to these 8 elements in the Paul and Elder model, and you don't have to worry about a large vocabulary, right? So if everybody's on the same page with Paul and Elder, it makes it a lot easier.
In your experience with graduate students, which of these 8 elements is most often overlooked?
Without a doubt, myself included, purpose. The most important is purpose, and the most overlooked is purpose. And I frequently ask students, if they ask me a question, my first response is always, what is the purpose of your question? So if they're asking me questions and they don't have a clear purpose, then they're not going to get much out of my answer. So I'm hoping that they practice asking questions which have a clear purpose.
Once we break down the elements, how do we evaluate if our thinking is actually sound? So how do the universal intellectual standards as a quality control?
I see. So you're referring to, in the Paul and Elder model, there are the universal intellectual standards, which include what I call very core standards, like logical, relevant, clear, logical, relevant. So if you make a statement, at a minimum, for communicating to others, the statement should be clear, relevant, and logical. Now, you might say, well, then how do you determine if it's logical? How do you determine if it's clear? But at least you have these basic beginnings to start to evaluate. If I make a statement and my students look confused, I think probably what I said was not very clear, or it didn't resonate with them because they didn't find the relevancy. So I might try to improve the relevancy or to clarify what I said. And the other standards are, the way I try to use them is, if I write a sentence, which is an important part of my opinion, then I will try to identify, at a minimum, will my audience be able to understand it? Is it clear? Is it relevant to the audience? And why do I think it's relevant for them? Obviously logical, meaning it's not using one of the fallacies, the logical fallacies. But then, more importantly, is my idea significant? Is it deep, or is it broad? Is it more theoretical, or is it more concrete? So those standards are how I evaluate my own statements, and I can consider how I can make them more relevant, more significant, deeper, address a complexity more clearly. So that's how you can use the standards as a way to improve what you've written, for example. And of course, we apply the standards to specific elements. You can apply them to your opinion in general, but your opinion should have some purpose. So is the purpose of my opinion clear? Is the purpose of my opinion relevant for the audience?
Could you give us a quick real-world example of an argument failing these standards?
Well, I frequently use this idea of raising taxes, the effect of raising taxes, and the arguments for and against raising taxes on the rich to redistribute to the poor. So that is the issue that we're discussing. And then if the typical thinking of somebody who is against raising taxes on the rich might make the argument that taking money from the rich people might lead to fewer jobs because they create jobs with their profits, and so that's one argument they might use against raising taxes on the rich. But if you go through if deeper at the likelihood of, does that make sense? Is that a good argument for not raising taxes to redistribute to the poor? Then it doesn't live up to critical thinking in the terms of looking at the different perspectives and weighing the consequences, for example. So you could come up with a better opinion regarding this complex issue. So those who would quickly say, no, we should raise tax on the rich to redistribute to the poor, again, that's too simple explanation. It's saying what we should do, but it doesn't really address the issue of, well, does the money that is collected and given to the poor actually have any effect? Will it have effect? And so, and how much effect? And maybe we should look at the deeper problems of just giving money to poor people doesn't solve the issue of why they're poor at all, right? So perhaps a better opinion which addresses the issue would be that humanitarian assistance should be given to the needy. We should have a compassionate policy, okay? But compassionate policies are not necessarily effective for other issues. So taking money from the rich, giving it to the poor, might reduce some harm and suffering of poor people. So that's a good reason to do it. On the other hand, it doesn't address the systemic problem of trying to bring poor people out of poverty.
Applying the standards consistently leads to what Paul and others call intellectual traits. Why is character like intellectual humility or empathy just as vital as raw logic? I
see. So the Paul and Elder model, traits is one of the three parts of the model, and the thinking is that your attitude towards a problem, for example, or an issue, is just as important as the logic itself. So, for example, with the taxing the rich and redistributing to the poor, do I approach that problem from confidence in reasoning or humility, right? So, do I really believe I know everything there is to know about creating a informed opinion about what should be done in that case? So if I don't practice humility, if I don't approach this problem from a point of view of trying to be humble, or at least understanding that I might be wrong, okay? I might not have all of the facts correct, or I might not have a clear understanding. So your attitude, your traits as a thinker affect the quality of your thoughts. So the intellectual traits like intellectual autonomy, thinking by myself through issues rather than accepting what influencers are telling me. For example, can I think through issues by myself, right? The willingness. So if I approach a critical thinking issue, the traits give me a good starting point for how I intend to approach this issue, from intellectual humility, integrity, confidence in reasoning, fair-minded. That's one of the traits which you don't see in other models that I've looked at anyways.
So for the students watching this before coming to your class, so how should they expect to put this framework into practice during your course?
Ideally, I enjoy students who trust but verify. So maybe they give Paul and Elder the benefit of the doubt, and they give me my explanations the benefit of the doubt, but then they question every item on the model, every word, every opinion that I give them, that they think through themselves and say, does that make sense to me? And if they don't understand it, or if they think they understand it, or they want to believe it only because I'm professor, then they won't learn very deeply. But if they think through, okay, most of what I say in class are my opinions, and they should challenge, if they want to learn critical thinking, they have to be willing to challenge opinions from authorities and think through by themselves. So yeah, I'm very happy when students challenge my unclear explanations, or when I fail to give my assumptions. They're going to be learning better.
So if viewers, whether a student or a general audience member, remember just one takeaway from today, and what should it be?
Start with the intellectual trait of humility, intellectual humility. If you want to practice critical thinking, if you practice humility, you won't jump to conclusions. You will question more why you believe something. And even if you've believed something for many, many years, if you start to think, well, I might be wrong. I might have my understanding might not address the complexity. So that will kick off your critical thinking.
Okay, Professor, thank you for sharing insights, and to everyone watching, we look forward to seeing you put these tools to work in class. Okay, finish.
Thank you.